Welcome back to NTV Tonight. On the special coverage of the National Budget 2019-2020, the Treasury Cabinet Secretary this afternoon laid the spending plan for the national government at the Parliament, and this was a matter of quite intense debate. And I have a panel with me, which I just introduced before the break, but if you're just joining us, I have Rose Maura, who is a chairperson at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, as well as a partner at Deloitte. Ashif Kasam, to my immediate left, is the Executive Director of RSM and a member of the KEPSA Governing Council, and Mheshimiwa Bilo Kero, who is a former Senate chair for their Budget and Finance Committee. And just to introduce this conversation, this budget comes within the context of a broader fiscal policy discussion around the need for consolidation, where the government should be checking on its expenditures because we are not quite meeting our revenue targets. When you listen through the speech by the Treasury CS, did you feel that we are still within the realm of fiscal consolidation, or we are losing the plot? Rose, if I could start with you.
I think we definitely have a challenge there because when you think about, as of April this year, KRA reported to us that they had raised about 1.1 trillion in terms of revenues. So if you extrapolate that through June of this year, you're really looking at about 1.4, 1.5 versus what had been expected of about 1.7 trillion to be raised. So already you're starting off with a deficit of about 300 billion that has not been collected. And then now you're looking at the fact that we're giving them a target of about 2 billion, roughly 1.8 billion that they should, trillion that they should collect. And so, and then of course the fact that we start off with this huge expenditure budgeted of about 2.8 trillion, and then we know very well that we've not even managed to collect the 1.7 from, and we're targeting 1.8. Yeah. So really, for me, when I look at it, we're definitely losing the plot there around the fiscal consolidation. Mm-hmm. We need to start thinking about how do we live within our means, and how do we focus our resources to those sectors of the economy that will actually stimulate the economy and put money back into Wananchi's pockets.
Okay. Mheshimiwa Bilo Kero, if I could come to you. One of the key discussions we normally have around this issue of revenue and expenditure is sealing the revenue leakages, and you had quite some bias there around corruption and allocation to various investigative agencies, just to ensure that we at least possibly begin to seal some of these leakages and beef up our kitty. Do you feel enough is being done on this front?
No, not at all. If you look at what has been allocated, I mean, you've just reported, what has been allocated to the institutions that are fighting corruption is a joke. We are in a country where the government has admitted 1/3 of its revenue or its budget, if it is 3 trillion, nearly 1 trillion, is actually lost through pilferage, corruption, wastage, inefficiencies, and so forth. And the key institutions which are fighting, 8 or 9 of those institutions, the total budget that they got is lower than what the National Assembly, the Parliament got. Parliament got 41 billion. All of those institutions that are supposed to safeguard that 3 trillion are getting less than the 40 billion. And by the way, that's not enough. Parliament not only got the 41 billion, but they got an additional 44 billion for CDF and the Women Reps Fund, affirmative action. But so the trouble with the budgets, just to comment on what Rose mentioned earlier, is that in the last few years, we have not seen any attempt by the government or Treasury to balance its budget. It's always being, if you look at it from a simple man's point of view, you have a revenue that they target, assume they get even the 2 trillion, and an expenditure of 3 trillion. Automatically, you have a deficit of 1 trillion. It's been simple, it has been always been, and it's not something that really should, ideally ministers used to struggle to try and balance their budgets. Yeah. And this is the reason why our budget, the expenditure of 3 trillion, is more than the budgeted expenditure of all the countries in East Africa combined. The countries that read their budget today, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, all of them combined. It's still less than the $30 billion of the Kenyan budget. Okay. Look at Ethiopia, with now the largest economy in Eastern Africa. GDP of 86 billion compared to ours of 74 billion. Their budget is just 13 billion. Okay. People, the trouble we have is a government that is trying to live beyond its means. Okay. You know, that largesse, everyone trying to, as much as they can. And unfortunately, that is the reason why there's this fiscal deficit is always a major problem.
And Ashif, just to pick from where the governor has left it, clearly saying that Rotich is not putting his money where his mouth is, because he's here talking about this, but on the other hand, Parliament is receiving so much. When you look at a deficit of about 600 billion shillings. And you look at, compared to last year where it was pretty much within the same range. Do you feel this was a score for the government? Do you feel we still have a lot of challenges to sort out?
Definitely we have challenges to sort out, there is no doubt about that. But the issue is, are we tackling these challenges? Yes, I'm sympathetic to the government that this government inherited 48 governments. And you have got 47 counties in the national government. But we have already got, this is the second cycle. And this is probably the 9th year after the devolution that we can plan this.
Yes.
Simple things like consolidating HR amongst counties, okay, is not being done. If you look at everything in the budget, there is not one thing. The issue of human resource audits has been a continuous thing. We never get to the end of these human resource audits. There is no consolidation of the people around this. And to me, a 15–20% saving will come from improving the efficiency in the public sector and reducing the number of people working there. Not removing people who are retiring, just removing people who are not productive. It's, you know, some of the people who are retiring might be more productive than the people who are there. So I think the whole issue of looking at the labor force within the government and making it more efficient is critical, which is just not being touched on.
Okay. And Rose, just to switch gears now to look at one issue which predominantly faces the Kenyan budget and tax measures, there's always a discussion around we need to widen the tax net so that we have a lot more people contributing to the national kitty, and therefore at least we can possibly now begin to grow to reduce our deficit rather. When you listened or read through this budget for 2019-2020, did you get the sense that the issue of widening the tax net was sufficiently addressed?
Probably not. I think there was some attempt to do this with introducing the withholding taxes on services, security, cleaning and catering that was not there previously, to make sure that even if some of these companies are not paying income taxes, at least they're captured through the withholding taxes that are withheld. But compared to what was there last year, so quite a number of measures have been introduced in the past. There was an issue of trying to target the landlords. That has not necessarily worked, although we've been seeing in the media recently saying that they're now actually going to like Kenya Power records or other service metering records to try and target those. We've also seen some issues around KRA trying to go to the insurance companies to get the records about what has been paid to doctors. But I think that other measures such as a presumptive tax seem to just have fizzled out, and we're not hearing about the presumptive tax anymore or how it has been implemented. So I do believe that really there has not been that, I would say, sufficient or at least what we can actually see effort in terms of widening that tax net.
Okay. And that point by Rose now leads us to our next point of discussion, where we'll be looking at a story which I will be expecting the Mheshimiwa Bill Okero to comment on. Now, the defeat of the Division of Revenue Bill at the Mediation Committee has revived the supremacy wars that have characterized the relationship between the Senate and the National Assembly, with senators accusing their colleagues of being government puppets. The Senate insists there was no clear justification as to why counties were being given less money than what senators had proposed. At today's failed mediation talks, National Assembly members had gone up from 310 billion shillings to 316 billion shillings as the equitable share allocation for the counties, while the Senate had reduced its demands from 335 billion shillings to 327 billion shillings. Now, NTV's political affairs reporter Kennedy Mureithi with more on that story.
The Division of Revenue Bill will have to be reintroduced afresh in the National Assembly probably next week, as senators insist that they will not budge on their demands that they have even made before the Mediation Committee, as they seek to have more money taken to the counties.
But in their quest, senators believe their National Assembly counterparts are not coming to the negotiation table with a clean heart, as they already have a predetermined mindset, which senators claim is controlled by the executive.
Our colleagues from the National Assembly seem to be talking for the Treasury.
The argument is pedestrian.
That would be a very misplaced accusation, because the National Assembly is not an appendage of the executive at all.
According to members of the National Assembly, senators are being stubborn and do not want to identify with the reality of the day. that there is no money.
We have been able to temper our expectations with reality. Just like we did with the national government budget, we were able to rationalize and prioritize what needs to be done this year. There are a number of things that you'll see if you read our report that we postponed from this year's budget to the future. And all we're asking the Senate is also to be able to temper their expectations.
They're coming with issues like you must do cost functions, the counties are corrupt. These stories are not there for us. You know, corruption is everywhere. I think there's no more corruption in national government than there is in the counties.
Even the money we give to counties, 65% is going to recurrent. That was not the intention of devolution.
Senators say the national government is not being realistic when tabling a budget of 3 trillion shillings, yet counties cannot get the 327 billion shillings they are asking for.
We want to save the country. We want to work on a realistic projection of revenue. We don't want supplementaries, too many supplementaries.
The argument that, you know, the projections are always, not achieved, it's not our business. It's Treasury's business and KRA's. Why project if you can't collect money?
The reintroduction of the Division of Revenue Bill afresh in the National Assembly and debate in the Senate once more is not a guarantee that they will reach an amicable solution, thus putting in limbo development in counties. Kennedy Mureithi, NTV.
Quite a sticky matter there between the National Assembly and the Senate. But staying with the budget, the education sector has emerged as a big winner in the 2019-2020 budgetary allocations. The government has set aside 3.2 billion shillings to go into the employment of teachers in different parts of the country. The increase comes amidst the implementation of the new curriculum. 1 billion shillings has also been set aside for the youth to enable them to start businesses. Treasury CS Henry Rotich stated that the three funds, Wezo Fund, Youth Fund and the Women Enterprise Fund, will be consolidated into one fund known as the Biashara Kenya Fund. The elderly in society have also not been left behind, as they have been allocated 16.6 billion shillings for cash transfers.
Mr. Speaker, to share the benefit of our growing economy and to relieve the blight of our vulnerable members of our society, we have provided 16.6 billion for cash transfers to the elderly person, 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, and 1.1 billion for cash transfers to persons with severe disabilities. Also, we have set aside 2.3 billion for the Kenya Anger Safety Net program and 100 million to support those with albinism and 200 million for the National Council for Persons with Disabilities Fund.
And that story brings us back to our discussion trying to unpack the budget 2019-2020 and seeing what this has in terms of implications for your budget and mine. And picking up from that issue of the Division of Revenue Bill and the contest between the Senate and the National Assembly, Bill Okero, if I could get your views on this, you're a former Senate Chair for the Budget and Finance Committee. Do you feel the law was followed, the Public Finance Management Act in the spirit and the letter of it was adhered to?
No, I don't think so. The Constitution is very clear, the timelines. You cannot have the budget until the Division of Revenue Bill has been enacted into law. That is the Constitution. But looking at this thing really objectively, you get the impression that the National Assembly obviously misses the point. It's a question of being penny-wise and pound-foolish. When you don't look at the fact that this 327 billion you are giving the county is 10% of the 3.2 trillion. Mm-hmm. So 47 governments that Kasim mentioned is essentially just going to spend 10% of the budget. And really, we should be worried about what happens to the 90% of the budget that remains with the national government, which is where all these issues about corruption and all these things are. But again, there seems to be a problem between Treasury and Parliament generally in terms of the budget making process, which creates a lot of these delays always. Yeah. You look at what's happening today. Just earlier, before the minister presented the budget, they were still discussing the supplementary estimates. As we speak, yeah. It has not even been assented to by the president. It was being discussed minutes before the minister came in, which really shows that the problem with our budget system is that there is no audit at the end of the year of the performance of the budget. We only hear the plans. But at the end of the year, no effort is being made to look at the implementation, how, the fidelity of the government with its plans, how much of these things have actually been. So this is why there's always this lack of priorities. You look at, for example, the allocations. You are giving the challenges we have today in education. It's really not in primary schools and secondary. It's in the higher education, the colleges, universities, people can't afford. And that is, the universities are shutting down because of lack of fees, lack of money.
Yeah.
You are allocating them, the whole of higher education, 108 billion. You are giving the military alone, not security, just the military, 121 billion.
Yeah.
We are not at war. I mean, honestly, you say your priorities are right, they can't be right.
Okay.
So that this is why we're having the challenges, because there's no attempt to try and audit this thing at the end of the year.
Okay. And just to stay with the matter of the counties and to bring it now to Ashif, I spoke to the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary yesterday, and he tabled a defense that, hey, look, we have clear prescriptions in terms of counties' capacity to mobilize on-source revenue, and even if you look at the distinction between recurrent and development expenditure at the counties, it doesn't really adhere to the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act. There's a provision that at least 30% should go to development. If you look at the Auditor General's report, they paint a very different narrative. Where do you think counties are perhaps missing it in terms of just meeting their own revenue capacity?
I think it comes down to the capacity of the people running the counties. And I think we have not made enough investments into the county infrastructure. We have not made enough investments into educating how this budget is to be used. And the entire procurement process is very difficult. And some of these could also be consolidated at the national level, in terms of project feasibilities and other things that the counties need. I don't think so we have the resources there to spend that money. And the other part is that there is a total misallocation of resources to counties like Nairobi. So you look at the roads, the state of the roads is because of there is not enough money coming into the larger counties. So is the allocation first enough? We've devolved the government, but as Honorable Kero said, we haven't devolved the spending. It's only 10% going to the counties, 90% still going to other parts. And I think that's a critical decision in terms of how we review, and if you're talking about reviewing the constitution, how we review the expenditure mechanism, how we review the counties collection of their own funds, but also how they will spend it and the building of the capacity within counties.
Okay. And just as we get to the tail end of the conversation, Rose, just to seek your view on one issue that has been a pertinent issue in this discussion of tax revenue, the VAT refunds. You've seen the proposals today in terms of withholding tax from 6% to 2%. Do you feel this will address the challenge that we normally have in terms of refunds?
Well, it will reduce the accumulation in that, but of course the big question is there enough funds that have been allocated for some of the refunds? But of course, given that you're reducing the withholding VAT from 6% to 2%, that's going to make a big difference in terms of that accumulation, and hopefully it'll also free up some of the cash flow. Of course, we still have some bigger issues around this, on the issue of pending bills that have remained unpaid, on the issue of VAT that has not been reimbursed. And these are really, really huge amounts that need to be paid. I know that there was a proposal to pay about 10.9 billion of the pending bills, and of course there's a new law that's coming in, bill proposing that all pending bills must be paid within a 60-day period.
Yes.
But when you look at what is the overall amount of pending bills, I know that as of the number that we had gotten as of last year was about 108 billion. Today, nobody knows what's the real amount of pending bills that are in the system. Yeah. So proposing that you're only paying 10.9 billion, it's really a drop in the ocean. Yes, it might free up some cash flow, but is that enough to really stimulate the economy? We know that companies have gone bankrupt, people have committed suicide and all that. Yes. But so we really, more money needs to be allocated and more effort needs to be put in place to make sure that...
Okay, really quickly, Ashif, just to get like your winding up comments, the private sector, do you feel the raft of proposals that were made, especially in terms of manufacturing, do you feel this was strong enough to support the private sector?
Look, manufacturing has got a lot of positives from this budget, but these are all because of lobbying. What is not there is a fresh thinking on what the private sector and the manufacturer and the integration of the agricultural sector into the manufacturing sector, which needs a totally different look. There is nothing around that.
Yeah.
So yes, people who have lobbied have got what they've got, but people who have not lobbied have not got things that can actually turn this country around.
Okay. And Senator Bill Okello, you looked like you had something to add on to that, please.
Yes, on to both of them. I think first there is a disconnect between Treasury and the public and even the businesses in terms of the growth of this economy. When you talk of the economy doing very well, when the rest of us, everybody in business believes that the economy is subdued really, and we expected some measures to stimulate the economy. One of them, which would have been easy for government, is to pay the pending bills. According to a study done by Genghis Capital, the total from both national and county is now nearly 400 billion.
Yeah.
So to talk of 10 billion really is a joke. The second thing is you can actually see that from the performance of KRA. The reason why KRA is struggling is because the economy is not performing.
Yes.
If the economy is performing, KRA would be able to meet its target. So I think it's also, lastly, I want to say that not only on manufacturing, but generally on the big four, the reality is that little has really happened in terms of, if you look at all the 1, 2, 3 security, food security is still a problem. We're importing maize. You look at all of them, but the manufacturing, what I've seen the proposals is making really don't add value, because you're looking at reviving some dead companies like Rivertex and so forth. He says we've done well on counterfeits, and those are not the challenges. The challenge is in the competitiveness of the industry.
Yeah.
The reason is because still the cost of freight is high, the energy is still very high. 7 years after this government pledged to put 5,000 megawatts on whatever, we are not there.
Okay.
The SGR has become a passenger for tourism. So I think there are challenges really in manufacturing that are not addressed.
All right. And that point by Bill Okello is where we leave this discussion. Unfortunately, we couldn't unpack it a lot more, but through tomorrow and next week, we'll be looking into the various allocations, and that is where we wrap up our discussion tonight. We take a break.